Forge FC is ready for their upcoming match.
Simply stunning stuff. And finally, their goal. My word, what a rocket.
Now, let's get you up to date with Anthony Urciuoli and Match Day Preview on the Forge Audio Network.
Hey, Forge fans, it's the Forge Audio Network, your official home of the reigning, defending, undisputed Canadian Premier League champions, Forge FC. The club hits the road Friday night, 10 o'clock start time against Pacific FC, the first place Pacific FC at Starlight Stadium in Victoria. Forge coming off a disappointing result in a torrential downpour at home last week, allowing a late equalizer off a set piece against a lesser opponent in Valor. Should have been 3 points in the bag, hence the disappointing result. Nevertheless, single point. Looking ahead, Terran Campbell, by the way, continuing his tear. Scored in the last match, Forge's only goal, making him the season leader in total goals scored with 8, and he padded his lead as the CPL's all-time leading goal scorer. And now Forge on the road, a place where they've performed quite well. Forge, tied with York, as the top road team this year. 8 games, 4 wins, 13 total points. There's a draw in there as well. Overall, though, opportunity is huge here for Forge FC. All of those negative feelings this year, results not quite going their way. When we put things in perspective, all that disappointment, none of that will matter. If Forge are able to secure 3 points against Pacific this week, that will move them into a tie for first place in the CPL. And then Calvary's coming up on the schedule soon, and that's a club that has a 1-point lead over Forge. So the upcoming weeks, forget everything that happened. It's all in front of them, and it starts against Pacific FC. Now, it will not be an easy task, to say the least. Pacific is in first place for a reason. However, they are winless in their last 4 matches. So perhaps the club coming down a little bit. The real Pacific may be a mixture of that team that went on a complete tear and the one that's been winless in their last 4. I guess we'll find out. Head-to-head, it's been all Forge. Now, you'd have to kind of ignore that one unfortunate match where Alessandro Hoja-Rapport scored the championship clinching goal against Forge FC. Pacific fans will remember that one the most. But if you're a Forge fan, you might remember that in the last 16 matches between these clubs, Pacific has only won 4 times. Forge winning 10, and they've drawn a couple of times too. This season split right down the middle. Home field has meant nothing for either of these clubs in their head-to-head matchup. They met back in April at Pacific. Forge won that, 1-0. They played again in June in Hamilton. Pacific came away with a 1-0 victory in that one. So right down the middle. Also head-to-head, 4 of the last 5 matches between these two clubs there have been a combined less than, let's say, 2.5 goals. So either 2 or less in 4 of the last 5 matches. So these clubs typically playing in low-scoring affairs, very tight, very, let's just say real estate at a premium, space at a premium. When you score, you've earned it. These two clubs, you're always getting 100% when these two meet and go head-to-head. Looking at some of the numbers here now, Pacific, for the most part this year, have just gotten by on just being able to score more than anybody else per match. 1.67 goals per match. By comparison, Forge is at 1.31. Now, here's the interesting stat when it comes to Pacific. A club, now this could be because they're leading so often that they're willing to give up possession, but Pacific, 6th in the league in total possession, 49.5%. You do not see that very often from a first place club where on average they're giving up the majority of the possession. But that is the case. Again, could it be because when they have the lead, they're able to they're just comfortable defending and giving up ball possession? That might be some of it. Still a surprising number. Forge at the top convincingly with a ton of room The number one ball possession club in the league at 57% is Forge FC. And we know that is their brand of soccer. Interestingly enough, Forge hit the post again last match. And I know it seems like a weird stat to track, but just you look at the ball possession, you look at the fact that Forge continues to dominate the league in terms of shots, even just shot attempts. They have 30 more attempts than the next best team. I mean, they're shooting the ball often. They have the possession. Sometimes luck just doesn't go their way. And a perfect example of that is when we look at the woodwork stats. Forge have hit 10 posts this season, right? By far leading the league. By comparison, and here's where the tough luck comes in. Pacific, Cavalry, Atletico Valor have hit the post 6 times this year. Forge has nearly double the amount of posts as the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th place club if you're looking at those rankings in terms of how many clubs have hit the post this season. So it speaks to the lack of luck and ball luck and bounces that Forge have had this season. We're going to get more into some stats because we'll deliver the 3 keys a little later on, and we'll get more into some of these stats because they all kind of tie in. But before we get there, we're going to check in with Cleve Dheensaw, Hall of Fame journalist in BC. He covers Pacific FC. We're lucky to have him, and he joins us now. All right, Cleve, always an honor, by the way, to be chatting with a Hall of Famer. You've covered it all as a journalist. Where does your experience covering Pacific and the CPL rank? Because it's a pretty extensive resume.
Yeah, 42 years of covering sports on Vancouver Island. It's been great. And soccer has been a big part of that, especially the highlight for me, a career highlight, is 1986 and the strong involvement of island athletes in the World Cup qualifying during that quadrennial, and also then at the World Cup itself. It's sort of flipped now with most of the athletes on the national team, both the soccer and basketball now, from the GTA. And before it was from Victoria and Vancouver that was producing a lot of these athletes. And of course, 1986 was a particular highlight with 3 island athletes. An island of then probably about 500,000 people, almost a million now, but still off on the edge of the periphery of the country, and producing, of course, George Pecos, who scored the 2 of the 4 goals in qualifying that got Canada into Mexico in 1986. And a remarkable story, of course, an amateur player of the Vancouver Island Soccer League who never played pro, and who scored 2 of the 4 most important goals in Canadian, soccer history. Had to play in the World Cup in his vacation time from with the city of Victoria. Had to take holidays to go play in the World Cup and in qualifying, and he was a water meter reader for the city of Victoria. And of course, a tremendous, tremendous story. It could never happen again, right? I mean, it's absolutely crazy that things like that would happen. And, another player from the Vancouver Island Soccer League playing in the World Cup, Jamie Lowry, first game, went out to mark Michel Platini. A complete amateur player from Victoria West Club, and that was the group that Tony Waiters built. And of course, Ian Bridge, the 3rd Islander on that team. Anyways, and he was more of a pro and of an established type player, around, in the pro ranks. But that's the team that, Tony Waiters and what he was up against, back in the 80s. And one of the biggest things coming full circle now is that out of the World Cup in 86 was the establishment of the old Canadian Soccer League, the CSL, which was the first attempt at CPL style pro league. And Victoria had a team, the Victoria Vistas. And Winnipeg Fury were a part of it, in Vancouver 86ers. So that was the first attempt, and it didn't last. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Lato was the coach of the Hamilton team. Who was the leading scorer for Poland in the 1974 World Cup. And I remember interviewing him before Hamilton came out, and I just can't believe I was talking to him on the phone, right? I'd say, "You're Lado." Right? Yeah. And anyway, and now, you go, 40 years later and come full circle with a second attempt at the CP at a domestic pro soccer league, and it's been great. That arc of that career you get to sort of see happen.
Hmm.
The game a long time, sports writing game, and it's interesting to see how it comes full circle. And again, come full circle 36 years after that World Cup appearance, and Canada's next wouldn't happen, as we know, for 36 years, and here it did happen with another attempt at, a few years ahead of this qualification, but with another attempt at a domestic Canadian Pro League, and this one looks like it will stick. And it's been very important for Canada as well. I mean, already call ups to the national team, from there's two in this Gold Cup last go around, and 6 in total from this league. Playing in the Gold Cup for other countries as well, and so it's been. Interesting to see this arc, over 40 years develop, especially in soccer. And for me personally, just because of the close connection I had to 86, and now covering, the island, also having a team in the, in the resurrection of the Pro League 40 years later with the CPL.
What is it about the CPL then that you think, you mentioned that you think this one will stick? What is it about this attempt that's different from the last attempt?
Well, I think the last attempt was... it wasn't grounded in a sort of sense of the business model wasn't as good as this one is.
Okay.
First of all, this one is obviously built on the big deal that was signed, before the $20 million deal, which, included One Soccer and the whole sort of, it was a much wider worldview than the CSL had back in the day. And the business model there was more local, and there wasn't that extra income coming in. And again, it's the biggest thing about sport in this country is the vast travel distances, right? And they couldn't account for that in the early 80s, late 1990s, and CSL sort of floundered. This one, it's got that strong deal, and we'll see what happens after 10 years. And already the deal is being criticized, right, from people who didn't really know what was going on if everybody would have jumped at that deal in 2018. Nobody knows what was about to happen with the with the national teams, and the qualification. Everything was geared for 2026, and that was what the deal was geared for. And of course, everything was pushed ahead. The national team came together and became a major factor in CONCACAF 4 years before anybody thought it would. And player signing, especially three or four in the big Premiership leagues in over in Europe, and then the women winning the gold medal at the Olympics in Tokyo. All this happened so quickly, and then people wonder, well, we got a hot product here. Why did we sign that deal? Well, you didn't have a hot product in 2018 when it signed, and anybody would have jumped at that deal where Canadian soccer was at that point. And I think a lot of the people criticizing that deal now don't understand where the game was in 2018, when that deal was first offered. And it was an unbelievable bonanza at that time. Later, people going, well, we could have got more. Well, nobody could have anticipated what was going to happen, national teams especially. And then, people start criticizing then the CPL, guys who were not Canadians, who were in higher leagues, going, well, why are we supporting this? Not realizing that you need Canada, the only country without a domestic pro soccer league in the world, a developed country anyways, and untenable situation. And what these players on the national leagues who are playing in Europe don't realize that without the CPL, I mean, there's going to be no growth at the grassroots level in Canada. The program, and the national team is going to suffer without the CPL in the years ahead. You might not jump directly from the CPL to the national team, but at least it's a start and gets people started to the higher levels, to the MLS and to Europe. And, already we're seeing it, guys up, who have had CPL experience and are now earning caps for their countries.
Yeah, I'm always a little curious about how the CPL clubs are received in the cities that they're based in those regions. Obviously, it's a little crowded in BC regarding pro soccer clubs, but especially that area of BC. But what has been the supporter appetite for Pacific? What's that been like? And where is that now?
Yeah, they have a hardcore group, of about, I'd say about 1,500, 25 who are going to show up every game, right? And then the rest depends on, the promotion for the particular game. So they're averaging about 2,800 to 3,300 for games, which is, I think, looks about average to me from what I can tell around the league. It's hard to get, attendance figures from the CPL, although, it's got one of the best media supports I've seen of all the leagues I cover. In terms of the website, is probably the best I've seen in terms of analytics of of
Hmm.
how games and advanced games and just their sheer in-depth analysis is pretty good. And I think within all the markets, you've seen a really hardcore for the soccer fans who know what's going on. They really appreciate it. I'm sure in Hamilton, got the hardcore people who really understand this is a really good level of soccer, especially at the starter level for Canadians who have never had this opportunity
Yeah.
to play pro before and would never get this opportunity, if this didn't exist. So, no, and I think one of the biggest things about the scene, not making grandiose claims about itself, just knowing what its role is to be there for Canadian young pros to help them start their journey.
Has the geographical rivalry with expansion Vancouver lived up to expectations, or is it still early? Do they need a couple of playoff matchups to get to that point?
Well, I think there's always anytime, less for Vancouver, but anytime Victoria Vancouver plays in anything, if it's the Western Hockey League, the Royals versus Giants, it's a big deal for Victoria, less so for Vancouver, obviously, because it's the bigger market. And same thing in lacrosse, it's Shamrocks versus the lower mainland teams. And, in all the sports, and basketball, especially in Canada West, UVic, UBC is a huge basketball rivalry. Yeah, the first game here was electric, and it was the first game of the season. And of course, they had VFC here playing PFC, and the place was packed. And and they had a huge supporters group come out, huge by CPL standards, but 200-300 people from Vancouver FC, coming out in one section, and of course. Manny Aparicio scores late in that game to give Pacific the victory, and goes over, and of course the Trident flag, logo to the Vancouver supporters, and of course they didn't like it, and that sort of really cemented the rivalry right from the start. And you could still feel it. And then when first game over there was a Friday night, so you couldn't get a lot of people from the island over there on a Friday night, but there was still a strong Pacific contingent there, and that was a wild game. I think it was 6-4. It was absolutely one of the crazier games there in the CPL, scoring back and forth. And so, yeah, you can feel I think there's always going to be a little extra, when you get this game. It's much like Forge versus York, right?
Right.
You're gonna. There's always a little extra when it's the local derby, and it's the. And even if the players aren't obviously from that region, they sort of feel it with the community and the fans, and and the chatter back and forth. So there's a little, I would say there's a little extra whenever the two games that I've seen where VFC plays PFC, and I think that will only build as the years build and VFC gets better and is more competitive. And I think this is going to be one of the great storylines in the CPL over the years.
Yeah, and it's an 8-team league. It's rivalries are just they're so easy to come by because they play each other so often. And in the case of, in terms of Forge rivals, York's in there, Cavalry's in there, but Pacific's pretty much up there too. What's the feeling on the other side? Is Forge considered a big rival for Pacific supporters?
Well, I think when you look at the history of these two teams, right? There's been the big three in the first 4 years of this league. And Forge, of course, leads the pack with 3 championships. PFC has 1. And Calgary is a third team always knocking on the door. Mm-hmm. And look at the table this year. Top 3 are PFC, Forge, and Cavalry. With the teams now starting to, York is coming on. Halifax is coming on. Some of these teams, Ottawa showed last year, they made the final last year. So they're coming in. So Valor's always been there sort of, on the, so you see, and of course what Marty's done in York is amazing because they look like they're going to, be joining that elite group pretty soon as well. So it's pretty interesting, but the big 3 are still there. So, and the history, and talking about the history, of course, between these two teams, Forge has only lost 1 championship. and been to 4 championship games. Only lost one, and that was, of course, at Tim Hortons Field. Memorable game for obviously Victoria fans. 1-0. Hodge Patur scores the goal, and of course, then becomes a trident, right? So, then becomes a forge, becomes a hammer, and that's always so. Now you're getting to see these really interesting things happen in the CPL, where rivalries and not only but old players are coming back, and for us here, we feel Ollie Bassett comes back with Ottawa, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did you let him get away? He becomes the MVP of the league last year, right? And so
Right.
that's line, right? Terran Campbell, huge. He was a huge fan favorite here, right? And and Alejandro, and Hodge Purd's goal that still probably the biggest goal in franchise history for PFC. Got him the header out of nowhere, right?
Right.
Forge pretty much controlling the play, and then boom, that's football for you, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the header goes in, and PFC wins the league championship. So when those players come back like they will on Friday night, I mean that's a big storyline here as well. So these interesting things are happening in the league now, where it's getting a history, and fans know the
Right.
different, and they're getting to know the different rivalries, and everybody here on the island knows what Forge has done. They are the evil empire, right? To most of the league, right? So it's like 4 years of competition, 4 championship games, 3 championships, and deep runs into CONCACAF. And and everybody here knows what's on the line now is much like world football, regular season matters. There's two ways to get into CONCACAF next year, and it's no longer just CONCACAF League. It's the CONCACAF Champions League you go directly into. And one of them is a regular season championship, and so we're looking at a game Friday night that could go a long way toward deciding that regular season crown, right? And just the games between these two teams have been really weird. I mean, Forge comes here and virtually steals a game against Pacific, and then Pacific goes there and literally steals, on a play that may be the blunder of the year right now in the in I'm sure Tristan Henry is probably still thinking about that, coming in this week here. So interesting how they've split this series this year, and interesting how it's going to play out Friday night in the rubber match. There's one more game yet after that, but in this sort of rubber match to this point to see who takes the lead in this series, and it's been pretty even so far with a couple of weird incidents thrown in there, especially that Daniel's goal. I'm sure Forge is still ruining that, and again it happened to Forge again. Last game against Valor. I mean, that's, 4 points taken away from them right at the last minute that they're probably thinking, we could be in the top of the table if it wasn't for those little miscues at the end there in those 2 games, So it'll be very interesting. A lot of storylines going into Friday night with.
The one big storyline that really stood out, just going over Pacific and the lineup and some of the numbers. Salouf, he entered the club. He already had an impressive resume at the age of 21, but by all offensive measures, he's been a revelation of sorts, not just for Pacific, but, leads the league in a few of the advanced metrics, offensively anyway. Can you talk about the spark that he's provided the club?
Oh, amazing. And leads, I think, the league in assists. The first time I saw him, I had to go look at the roster. Go, okay, who is this guy? First time he subbed in the second half of that first game, and it was just like, wow. And he's not a large guy, so you're who is this sort of striker who is like just sort of slipping in between the openings and slithering? Slithering is a good word for what he does.
Yeah,
he just sort of slithers through there and gets his chances and offloads really well to build chances for other players as well. He's a great guy, visionary type player, and that's why it's 5 assists on the season, and along with his 4 goals, which is co-leading PFC. And then it's just the revelation. Anthony is the word. I mean, just another import brought in. They have a strong Dutch connection here. They've been bringing in players from the Netherlands for a few years, and this guy was just like he's been. A real find. You look for these guys, and obviously, if you've come up through the Dutch system, you're going to get good. Because
sure.
Through the their Premiership academy teams, the guy's going to be pretty good. And having played in Premiership in the Netherlands, but just his uncanny awareness of the game. and how he sees it, and how he can just find the tiny cracks to get in and create those chances, either taking themselves or offloading. He's been, I think, the find of the year in the CPL this year, of a European pro who just comes here and maybe the most notable of those type of players.
It looked like for a while that Pacific may just run away with the table. Now, last 4 games winless. Is this just kind of the natural ebb and flow of a season? Has there been a difference in their play over the last, month or so?
Yeah, it happened to them last year as well, and they led the league early on, had a terrific start, and then faded in the second half. And this, has happened again. I mean, looked like they were going, like you said, going to go ahead and run and hide atop the table, and then a 2-1 loss to Cavalry. Okay, it happens, and then another 2-1 loss to go into Halifax, and lose on a foggy night. Suddenly you start, then the team starts wondering about itself. Was this really built on a solid foundation here or early run, or was it sort of more on a less sturdy sort of a foundation? And pretty good result against going into York the last time was York controlled the first part of the game, and then PFC was probably unlucky not to win that in the second half with a few good chances, better chances, one off the crossbar earlier by and then Daniels was behind and just shot over the crossbar. So they might have liked to have 3 points there, but this would be really interesting. Haven't had a winning result in 4. 2 of those have been losses. A rebound kind of draw, and now you're playing one of the elite teams of the league on Friday night. So a very key game for Pacific in many, many ways.
Absolutely. Cleve Dheensaw, it's, again, not often I get to speak to a Hall of Famer, so always a pleasure to speak to you. You brought a lot to the table here, and hope we can do it again sometime.
Hey, Anthony, I hope we can do it again. And, I think this is going to go down to the wire. And with 2 of the teams that are going to be there for a very important regular season this year, just because it means so much, because you get that CONCACAF berth, along with the playoff. So it's going to be a race to remember into the fall in the CPL this year.
All right, 3 keys to the match for Forge FC taking on Pacific Friday night at 10 o'clock. By the way, there will be a live match in review following the conclusion, right after the final whistle in that match between Forge and Pacific. Key number 1 for Forge FC: silence Saloof, the 21-year-old Dutch attacker that arrived in Victoria back in January, has been the engine at the core of the Pacific attack this season. Leads the league in key passes and big chances created. He can beat you from either side of the pitch with either foot. And it'll be up to the Forge fullbacks primarily, who are typically involved in the attack. Let's just say Forge fullbacks like to get forward. They are very involved in the attack. However, in this match, they will have to be very careful, at least to ensure that Saloof is accounted for, especially on the counter. Key number 2 for Forge FC: disrupt the dribble. Pacific has been the best 1v1 club this season. They're leading the league in successful dribbles, which essentially just means they're beating their defenders one-on-one. They're dribbling past players, just to simplify things there. And Pacific leads the league in that stat, whereas Forge, still very high up in the league if you're going to rank teams in terms of successful dribbles, but Forge takes a more total football approach, the build, wearing down your opponents with possession, being patient, methodical, cerebral, where Pacific a little more of a direct approach, which explains why they don't have high possession numbers, and they're under 50% on average per match. They're coming directly at you north-south, not a ton of build, at least not compared to Forge. So it'll be up to Forge to disrupt those successful dribbles, not only with their individual defending, but by recognizing when help is needed and defending Pacific as a unit, which they've done very well over the last few games. Key number 3 for Forge FC: still shooting. Listen, the recipe, it works, right? They're doing everything right on the attack. number one in shot attempts, 30 more shot attempts than the next best team this year, but they've been unlucky. Right? We've talked about it. They hit the woodwork 10 times this season. The rest of the clubs on average hit the post 4 times this season, so more than double. So offensively, the club really needs to do what they've been doing, essentially. We saw the floodgates open against York with a 4-goal performance, and you have that feeling that if they just continue to do what they're doing, their luck has to turn around. It's just the law of averages. I mean, it just... Statistically, when you're doing everything right and you have proven players that are fully committed and doing all those things right, success has to come. When the work is put in, usually it results in success and consistent success, which this club is still trying to find, but they're there. They're doing everything right. And you have a feeling that we're going to see more and more offensive explosions from Forge. They just need to stick with it. And this is an opportunity to continue to do that against a very tough club in Pacific FC. As mentioned, first of all, if you're not subscribed to the Forge Audio Network, whether it's in podcast form, whether it's on YouTube, you gotta get on that, because there's content dropping daily from Mackenzie, who's doing a fantastic job, and for myself, who's been, adequate. I would say I've been fairly adequate over the last season plus. So this is your match day preview. 3 keys to the match will drop for you. That'll be on our social channels. And immediately following that match against Pacific, log on to our YouTube channel and you'll get a live instant match in review against Pacific. And hopefully we are talking about 3 massive points and a tie for first place on the CPL table. All right. In the meantime, enjoy, and we're going to talk to you really, really soon.
Forge FC is prepared, and now you are informed. This has been Match Day Preview with Anthony Urciuoli on the Forge Audio Network. Subscribe on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.